Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Hugs and handshakes between Starmer and Zelenskyy as the UK show their support for Ukraine ahead of Friday's summit between Trump and Putin. Over 100 organizations accuse Israel of weaponizing aid into Gaza as Hamas continues talks in Cairo. And facing a $1 billion lawsuit, First Lady Melania Trump considers suing Hunter Biden after he makes claims about her connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the much-anticipated summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is just one day away, with the Kremlin confirming a joint press conference between the two leaders will take place after they do meet. Earlier today, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at Downing Street, with the pair revealing there was a viable chance of a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine before the summit. We can now go live to London to speak to our correspondent, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, great to have you on the show. Zelenskyy was only inside Downing Street for just over an hour, but it's not about the duration, it's about the symbolism, isn't it?
There was a great deal of symbolism on show, Leigh-Ann. We saw effectively a red carpet being rolled out for Volodymyr Zelenskyy. There was a hug and a handshake as he went in. As he left, Keir Starmer walked him to his car. That is not normal protocol for a visit like that from a foreign leader to Downing Street. Inside number 10, we're told they had a private breakfast together. We saw pictures of them having coffee next to a pot of sunflowers, the sunflower being Ukraine's national flower and has become a symbol of its solidarity and resistance against Russia since the conflict began. So very heavy on symbolism indeed. And more broadly, this was about the UK again trying to show solidarity and support for Ukraine in the lead up to these crucial discussions on Friday, of course, which President Zelenskyy won't be at.
Yes, indeed. And as you said there, European nations have rallied around Zelenskyy ahead of tomorrow's all-important summit in Alaska, which everyone is focusing on. But will their show of force and united red lines make any difference when it comes to the summit and what we could see achieved from this?
Well, certainly European leaders have been privately and at times publicly expressing some cautious optimism that particularly after that conference call they held with Donald Trump yesterday, that they feel that actually the administration in Washington is hearing their views, is hearing their position, is hearing their calls for Ukraine not to be sold down the river in any way, for Ukraine to be represented at some point soon in these negotiations if they do make progress between the two individual US and Russian presidents in Alaska on Friday. But there is cautious optimism, is I think the best way to describe it, and there is still a heavy dose of skepticism in European capitals too. They do feel that there is a chance that America can use its weight to try and pressure Vladimir Putin towards some kind of peace negotiation that might be more favourable towards the Ukrainians than some European allies have been fearing in recent weeks and months. But they are also continuing to express deep skepticism about Vladimir Putin and Russia's commitment to peace, a meaningful negotiation and some kind of lasting peace settlement. So, as I say, I think cautious optimism is the transcending feeling in European allies of Ukraine at the moment. As you say, really unpredictable exactly what happens in Alaska on Friday and exactly, therefore, what comes out of the summit.
Yes, indeed, Ollie. And I think we're getting some cautious optimism from Donald Trump too, because he's been speaking ahead of that meeting. And he says Putin will make a deal at a second summit with Zelenskyy. Let's talk a little bit about this. Europe is weighing up locations for Zelenskyy to meet Putin for the first time since the invasion. But we've been talking about this cautious optimism. This all hinges on tomorrow's meeting, really, doesn't it? And we've also heard from Putin today.
Absolutely, it hinges on tomorrow's meeting. It may well be that there is to be no summit in the near future that involves Zelenskyy, Putin and Trump and perhaps other European leaders if Friday doesn't go as planned, as Donald Trump hopes it goes. Now, European countries certainly making contingency plans in the hope that things go well and that there can be a summit soon involving Volodymyr Zelenskyy and therefore looking at possible locations. Rome has been suggested by President Zelenskyy before. I think that's considered unlikely and potentially unwise by some other European countries who think it could be somewhere more neutral, perhaps somewhere like Geneva, perhaps not in Europe at all, perhaps Saudi Arabia, which has hosted previous rounds of diplomatic discussions about the Ukraine crisis. Turkey, of course, has held rounds of discussions too between the two sides and has offered to host further in the future. So lots of potential locations being looked at by Europeans and others for a new summit, a second summit in the not too distant future, if that is to be required and necessary and possible. And yes, Moscow has been talking about this today. Vladimir Putin has been praising the Americans for their commitment to trying to bring some kind of peace arrangement together. And we've seen that prisoner swap as well today. Some are suggesting could be signs of progress between Russia and Ukraine. So cautious optimism, as you say, is I think exactly where we all are, with a healthy dose of skepticism many European leaders feel required as well.
And Ollie, just before I let you go, the US Vice President J.D. Vance is now in Scotland after his UK holiday. He was spotted playing golf. But instead of putting his feet up, there were lots of political meetings and diplomacy going on.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I was in an aircraft hangar in Fairford in Gloucestershire yesterday as he addressed a very large and at times sweaty room of US service personnel and journalists like me as well. That was one of the official engagements he's carried out on this trip. He's also met with a bunch of UK politicians from different parties on the political spectrum. He held talks at Chevening, the UK Foreign Secretary's country residence, last weekend and at the end of last week. So it's been a mixture of work and play for the US Vice President while he's been here in the UK. And as you say, now in Scotland and has played golf today at one of his president's golf courses.
I wonder how well he did during that round. Ollie Barrett in London, thank you so much for joining us. Over 100 organisations have come together and signed a joint letter asking Israel to stop weaponization of aid into Gaza. Many global NGOs say they have been unable to deliver much-needed supplies since the 2nd of March, claiming Israeli authorities have denied their requests. Oxfam and MSF claim they are not authorized to transport aid unless they agree to strict Israeli regulations. Israel claim any delays to deliveries are down to organisations not adhering to the basic security requirements that prevent Hamas's involvement. I'm now joined by Jake Wallace-Simons, columnist at The Telegraph. Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. So, as you heard, 100 organisations say new Israeli rules are stopping critical aid getting into Gaza. Is Israel purposely starving innocent Palestinians?
I think that's what Hamas wants everybody to think. I think the real question here is why these aid organizations have such strong objections to Israel's security requirements, vetting the Palestinians working for them in Gaza, to try to root out Hamas from the supply line. Surely if their agenda was simply to get food to needy people in Gaza and not into the hands of Hamas, they would embrace Israel's security measures, working alongside the Israelis to make sure that their aid got to hungry people and not into the hands of jihadi terrorists. Unfortunately, they're trying to turn the tables of this debate and blaming Israel for not wanting to feed the Gazans, when actually all Israel's trying to do is to feed Gazan civilians while preventing Hamas from exploiting the supply of aid to keep themselves in power. It strikes me that in this way, these aid organizations are really lending their own international legitimacy to a jihadi agenda.
So last month, an internal US government review found no evidence of widespread theft by Hamas of US-funded aid. And senior Israeli military officials also told the New York Times they never found proof that Hamas stole aid from the UN in Gaza. Is this all propaganda from Israel to try and win back some public sympathy? Because we have seen that dramatically diminish across the world.
I'm afraid it is propaganda, but not by Israel. It's propaganda from Hamas and its sympathizers, because it's an open affair that Hamas has been stealing aid. Even the UN has admitted officially and formally that Hamas has infiltrated and stolen a good degree of the aid that it's been transporting into Gaza. That is the whole reason why Israel has been trying to cut out the UN and other bodies from aid distribution, instead relying upon the GHF, which is an Israeli-American project to get aid directly to Gazans and not to Hamas. Israel has no agenda to starve the Gazans. I'm not sure why it would go to the lengths of forming the GHF and trying to get food to them if it was really trying to starve them. It doesn't make any sense if you take a step back and think about it. Israel is simply trying to defeat Hamas, and so far Hamas has been surviving largely upon the flow of aid which it seizes and then sells for inflated prices, using that money to pay its own fighters. It's an open affair. You can check it online. You can see video after video of armed Hamas men stealing aid. The UN have acknowledged it themselves. It's not a contested fact. It's simply the truth.
And Jake, the truth is also that it's very impossible for anyone to really know the truth because, of course, international journalists aren't allowed into Gaza to report on anything at all. So I think we can both say it's propaganda from both sides, do you not think, from Hamas and Israel?
I don't think so at all. I mean, to accuse a Western-style democracy of propaganda akin to jihadi propaganda is totally disingenuous and wrong. This is not a case of two wrongs. This is a case of one side that is fighting for its life in a war that it didn't start, that it didn't want, that it didn't provoke and didn't ask for, against a jihadi force which seeks not just to destroy all the Jews and dismantle the state of Israel, but also seeks to dominate anybody who doesn't align with their own hardline version of warped version of Islamic principles. This is not a case of one side and the other side. This is a case of the free world represented by democratic Israel fighting against an existential threat from a jihadi menace. And there shouldn't be any doubt about which side all people of conscience should be on. Now, of course, war is ugly, war is desperate. That's why we tried to avoid war as much as we can. That's why we tried to avoid civilian casualties as much as we can. But if you're Hamas, you try to embrace civilian casualties as a propaganda tool against Israel and the West. We need to wake up and recognize that and start framing the debate in a responsible fashion.
Israeli far-right Minister Smotrich has announced a long-delayed West Bank settlement plan. Do you think this is a flagrant violation of international law that's happening now?
Look, I think that we're seeing the partial weaponization of international law again in favor of jihadism and against the state of Israel. Now, I'm not saying that in defense of Smotrich. I'm not a fan of his. But I think we need to recognize that the fact that the international community, or so much of it, has really made unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state their appalling response to the unprovoked invasion of Hamas on October the 7th has led to a sort of escalation, tit for tat. Israel feels very under siege, not just by Hamas, but of course also by much of the West and in the international community. And the response of this far-right firebrand minister is to accelerate the building of settlements in order to frustrate the aims of the international community. At the current time, the imposition of a Palestinian state with an unreformed Palestinian government in the West Bank, which still funds or rewards terror attacks with financial rewards, by the way, and a terrorist group in control of Gaza would be hugely detrimental to Israeli security. It's notable that the international community has not placed any demands upon the Palestinian side in return for recognition of a Palestinian state. It hasn't required Mahmoud Abbas's regime to renounce terrorism or to recognize Israel. It hasn't even required Hamas to give up the hostages and to lay down its arms. So under such circumstances, a state for such an appalling regime would clearly be to the detriment of Israel's security interests. And the fact that the international community is pushing it is really provoking the far right to come back with this kind of response and sending us further into the spiral of violence.
And just before I let you go, Jake, is Israel's plan to fully occupy Gaza a positive step, do you think?
Well, this obviously is a very controversial move, both within Israel and certainly around the world. I think the logic for it is sound in many ways. There is just no way that Israel can allow Hamas to emerge from this war still in control of Gaza and still holding hostages, because that would only mean further bloodshed and a further war in the future, probably further hostages and further suffering on both sides. The only way for this horrible conflict to end is for Hamas to be defeated militarily, to lay down its arms and to release the hostages. At the moment, there seems to be, from Netanyahu's point of view, no way of achieving those goals without properly rooting out Hamas from Gaza City and elsewhere in the Strip. Hamas has been decimated, has lost much of its command structure, is very weakened. It's down, but is certainly not out, and it's got to be out if this conflict is going to come to an end and if there's any chance of peace in the future.
Jake Wallace-Simons, columnist at The Telegraph, thank you for your thoughts and your insights. Let's continue this conversation now with Palestinian ambassador to Denmark, Professor Manuel Hassan. Professor, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show with me. Thank you for joining us. So we just heard there from our previous guest, I don't know if you could hear him, from Jake. And do you agree with his thoughts on Israel's full occupation of Gaza? Is it the only way to eradicate Hamas and make sure that Israel is safe in the future?
Well, actually, when we talk about the invasion of Gaza, Gaza has always been under siege by the Israelis for the last 17 years, even before the coup d'etat and before October 7th. So we don't see anything new by claiming that they will continue the war on innocent civilians and trying more or less to control Gaza for security reasons, because they will never get rid of Hamas and they will never try to control, physically, Gaza for a long time, because, you know, this is an occupation that has been going on for the last 78 years. Now, the international community has been, very critical of Israel's occupation with so many UN resolutions, and nothing has been done because the Americans have always used veto power in favor of the Israelis. So what's new in reoccupying Gaza? Is Israel going to create security by reoccupying Gaza? Is that the story? Or withdrawing from Gaza, ending occupation, and coming back to the negotiating table in order to finalize the delineation borders with the Palestinian Authority? That's the way out of this quagmire and this conflict. It's not by proselytizing, through biblical prophecy, the occupation of Gaza, then the occupation of some part of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and what have you. These are all considered to be rhetoric that Netanyahu is using basically to justify his position, to stay in power until, something concrete could happen where he could, in the final analysis, admit that, this war on Gaza has been a major mistake by Netanyahu and by this extreme right-wing government in Israel.
So you say that a major mistake by the extreme right-wing government in Israel and by Benjamin Netanyahu, but they don't seem to be stopping their plans to fully occupy Gaza. I know you said it's not the right way to go about it. They've been doing this for years and years previously. But I think the big question is, can the West stop them from doing this? Can the US sit back and allow Israel to fully occupy Gaza? They are bombing Gaza City now. What is the solution? Because going back to the table and getting a ceasefire doesn't seem viable at the moment, because it's happened before and it's fallen apart pretty quickly.
It is unfortunate that, the European countries, beyond, their moral sympathy and empathy, and beyond their criticisms of Israel weaponizing humanitarian aid and what have you, we haven't seen concrete position by the European governments in terms of boycotting trade with Israel, putting arms embargo on Israel, let alone the United States so far has been idle in letting, Netanyahu continue with his plans, to the point where the Palestinians will surrender and raise the white flag and start voluntarily, diasporizing themselves into Sinai, into Egypt, and what have you. This is going to continue with the plan of decimation the entire nation. They don't want the demography of the Palestinians. Israel wants the geography. And once they have Gaza, they think that they will secure basically their borders, with the Arab countries, and that will give them a clinch on the idea of having an independent Palestinian state, which they have been fighting for the last, 76 years. So where is the stand of the international community? How can they bolster their position, their rhetoric of putting the blame on Israel now in occupying Gaza and what have you, without taking concrete steps of how to go about it? Actually, the withdrawal of ambassadors is one way. The boycotting of Israel trades is another way. The embargo on arms to Israel is a third way. There are many ways where Israel could succumb basically to the international pressure and to stop this carnage in Gaza. But beyond, rhetoric, we haven't seen any concrete plans, neither from the United States, nor from Europe, neither also from the Arab states, that have been impotent in doing nothing, let alone the Islamic world is watching the massacres without, doing anything about stoppage or trying more or less to go out and criticize Israel so vociferously, besides, going on demonstrations and what have you. So the Palestinians are the ones who are receiving, this bad end, and the Israelis are getting away with the punishment of the Palestinians, and killing every day is becoming the modus operandi. So where do we stand as an international community to stop this violence that has been, this butchery that has been going on for almost 2 years now? Where is the humanitarian conscience in this?
And I think Ambassador, that's the big question. Many people are saying, is the West helpless? Are they putting enough pressure? Are the Arab nations doing the same thing? And are they putting enough pressure on Hamas? You talk about pressure on Israel, but we haven't seen any pressure on Hamas to make concessions, to agree to the ceasefire, to release the hostages. Why is everyone ignoring the fact that Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th, but no one is pressure raising them to come to the table as strongly as they are for Israel?
Let us not go back to the rhetoric of October 7th. We are beyond that, and I don't want to talk about that. But let me tell you something. It is very important that if you follow the news, that even my president, Mahmoud Abbas, has said it, on television, that Hamas should submit its weapons, hostages should be released, but with certain conditions, that Israel also should withdraw from Gaza. Israel should also open the borders, Rafah border, for humanitarian aid. Europeans should put also pressure on the other side, not only on Hamas. So from our perspective, Hamas is being under attack also by Egypt, by the Arab world, by my president, who has been, telling them time and again, let's end this conflict, let's end this carnage. Let's submit to negotiations where there will be ceasefire, exchange of hostages and political prisoners, and life will go on. But it's not being, explained all over. There are certain parts that the press takes against others. No, there are pressures on Hamas. There are pressures on Hamas from the Europeans, from the Americans, who opened a channel of communication with Hamas, and also from the Palestinian Authority, and from many other factions within the Palestinian Authority. And let alone, the most important is the criticism coming from the people in Gaza.
But is the Palestinian Authority even speaking to Hamas? Are they even talking to them to try and bring them to the table in a diplomatic way? And they're trying to say to Hamas, let's try to figure this out. Our people are dying. Is there no dialogue at all between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas?
Well, it has been always portrayed that the Palestinian Authority had its own channels with Hamas to stop this. But the conditions that are so worse in Gaza, and there are no conducive conditions for Israel to withdraw or to stop the carnage and the killings of the Palestinians. One thing that Hamas is asking, a ceasefire for 60 days, and everything will be settled through negotiations. Of course, by ceasefire, we have hostage exchanges and what have you. And by the same token, humanitarian aid would come to Gaza, and then the ambiance and the objective conditions will be ripe to sit down and negotiate a peace deal. A peace deal meaning that a truce should not only for a few months, but should end the war in Gaza once and for all. And that is not going to happen by just criticizing Hamas, but bringing Hamas to the negotiating table to end this conflict once and for all. It cannot be from one side concession. Both sides should make concessions to reach the optimum way of getting a win-win situation. And the way I see it, it's a zero-sum conflict where, Israel is not responding to Hamas's demands, and Hamas is not going to give up the hostages, because that's the only trump card for them to survive their presence in Gaza or the West Bank and what have you, for future political involvement in any peace negotiations.
Professor Manuel Hassan, Palestinian ambassador to Denmark, thank you for your thoughts and your insights this evening. Melania Trump has threatened to sue Hunter Biden over claims she was introduced to US President Donald Trump by the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. The First Lady's lawyers have said the allegations are false, disparaging, defamatory and inflammatory. Hunter Biden's son of the former US President Joe Biden made the claims during a recent interview about the Epstein files. A legal letter demands he retract the comments or face legal action for over $1 billion in damages. For more on this, I'm joined from Washington by our correspondent Sarah Firth. Sarah, wow, blockbuster. I must admit, I wasn't expecting this. First of all, can you explain what Hunter Biden actually claimed about Melania Trump and why it has prompted such a strong response from the First Lady?
Yes, Leigh-Ann, it's hotting up between the First Lady and the former president's son, Hunter Biden. So he claimed in this interview with filmmaker Andrew Callahan that Melania had met her husband, President Trump, through Jeffrey Epstein. Now, he went a bit further than that. He also claimed that the Epstein files would implicate the president himself. Now, the lawyers for the First Lady have sent a letter to Hunter Biden. They've called this false and defamatory. And they're saying that he's repeating claims that were first made by journalist Michael Wolff and in an article by the Daily Beast that was later retracted. Now, that just goes to show you that Melania Trump, President Trump, they push back very hard when these allegations emerge, as they have done this time with Hunter Biden's latest accusations. Now, Hunter Biden has actually responded to that call from the lawyers for either an apology or face this potential billion-dollar defamation lawsuit. He said in an interview with the same journalist, Andrew Callahan, when asked whether he wanted the opportunity to make that apology, that's not going to happen, although, Leigh-Ann, he was a little bit coarser and ruder than that as well. So it seems like that situation between those two sides just set to escalate further, given that response.
Yes, and as we just said, his response was pretty colourful. But the legal threat talks of about $1 billion in damages. That's a huge sum of money. How unusual is it to see a public figure, particularly someone like Melania Trump, of course the First Lady, pursuing these defamation claims on such a grand scale?
Yes, it's a really unique situation, not just because it's the First Lady, but also because of the costs involved in this threat of legal action. And also here in the US, for any kind of defamation lawsuit, if you're a public figure, it's a really, really high bar to try and prove that defamation has occurred. Now, in this case, the lawyers are saying that Hunter Biden is simply repeating something that's already been proven to be false. They point to that Daily Beast article that had to be retracted once it was scrutinised by the legal team for that outlet. And I think as well that this is something that has emerged in the past before. That President Trump and Melania Trump, they say that Melania met the president, then Donald Trump, at a modelling agent's party back in the 1990s. So they've refuted this before, and I think this time the fact that you've got such a public lawsuit threat made by her lawyers in this letter, and for such eye-watering amounts, it's sending a message here that if Hunter Biden continues along this path, and anyone else who makes this allegation, that Melania Trump, the First Lady, is willing to fight this in court.
And also, Sarah, I just want to talk about this dispute right now, because it's unfolding amid this huge pressure on the White House over the Epstein files. We know when Donald Trump was campaigning, he said he was going to release those Epstein files. Now, all of a sudden, they've hit back and said there's nothing to see here. And it's been quite controversial in the US and, of course, with this MAGA base. But how does this latest clash affect the political narrative when it comes to this Epstein issue, which is really not a small one?
Yes, Leigh-Ann, it's adding fuel to the fire. You're right, we've been reporting over the last few weeks about the ongoing developments with this saga, that really the White House wanted to see the chapter closed, but it's not going away, and largely because the issue has enraged his core MAGA base so much that this is going to be more fuel to that fire. You know, we've got a lot of scrutiny here in the United States over the fact that President Trump said when he came to office he would be releasing the Epstein files. Those are the files related to the criminal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, but then the Department of Justice came out and said there is no incriminating client list. That has caused a huge backlash. And I think really, though, again, with Hunter Biden making these allegations that Melania Trump met President Trump, met Donald Trump through Jeffrey Epstein, which there is no public evidence for, it has to be said, that it's again, the question of the connections, right? President Trump has acknowledged that he knew Jeffrey Epstein back in the day, but he says in the early 2000s they fell out over a staffing issue when Jeffrey Epstein poached, allegedly, staff from Mar-a-Lago. But there is this wider question of the connections between President Trump and Jeffrey Epstein in the past. Who knew who, how deep those connections go? And crucially, Leigh-Ann, the public feeling, have they really got the full story here? And that's this latest fight that's broken out between the First Lady, the lawyers issuing that letter to Hunter Biden coming out swinging in his response, saying he will not be apologising, is only going to create further scrutiny of those connections and the situation. President Trump will be speaking in just a short while in the Oval Office, and I expect there'll be quite a few questions around this issue headed his way.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah Firth in Washington, thank you so much for your analysis. Great to have you on the show. Let's take a look at the top business news now. The UK has recorded a slight GDP growth of 0.3% in the 3 months to June. The figures, according to the Office for National Statistics, represents a slowing, and among the factors prompting it are the higher business costs due to President Donald Trump's tariff. And fashion accessories chain Claire's has gone into administration in the UK and also Ireland. The move puts over 2,000 jobs at risk across 300 or more stores. The store has been dealing with competition and falling sales and recently did file for bankruptcy for the second time in just 7 years. Turning to the sports news now, and European champions PSG staged a late recovery against Tottenham Hotspur during the penalty shootout at the UEFA Super Cup. With 5 minutes left and 2-0 down, PSG completed a turnaround as Nuno Mendes stepped up and scored the deciding point. And defending world tennis champions Aryna Sabalenka and Jannik Sinner have advanced in the Cincinnati Open quarterfinals. Sabalenka won against Jessica Bowers-Marino with a 6-1, 7-5 victory, while Sinner beat Frenchman Adrien Maranhão 6-4, 7-6. Six-time Grand Slam champion Iga Swiatek has also reached the quarterfinals, along with Carlos Alcaraz, Ben Shelton, and also Alexander Zverev. Now, the closing arguments of imprisoned media tycoon Jimmy Lai were pushed back on Thursday after heavy rains forced Hong Kong to close its law courts. He is accused of collaborating with external actors and of conspiracy to publish seditious material. Lai could face up to a life in prison if he's found guilty under the territory's national security law. Earlier today, President Donald Trump said he would do everything to save him. Camille Nedelec is in Hong Kong with more.
The court case of imprisoned media tycoon Jimmy Lai is not just of strong political but also symbolic significance. Jimmy Lai's story is very much the story of Hong Kong, Hong Kong's humble beginnings from a small fishing village to the major financial centre that it is. Jimmy Lai came here at the age of 12 without a penny to his name. He started working in a clothes factory before building up his own fashion empire, before moving on to media. And it was that media empire, specifically the now shuttered Apple Daily, that got him caught in the crosshairs of the Hong Kong authorities. Apple Daily regularly criticised the Hong Kong government, and one of these charges that he faces is a colonial era charge, the conspiracy to publish seditious material, and now that is material that aims to incite rebellion against a monarch or a government. He, Jimmy Lai, has described himself in court as a political prisoner, and that is something that drew sharp rebuke from the judge. But Amnesty International last year agreed, designating him a prisoner of conscience. Meanwhile, his family are very worried about his condition. They've said that they are afraid that he could die in prison. He's in his late 70s. He has diabetes. And the Lai family are saying that he is not getting the proper medical care for managing his condition. Now, that is something that the Hong Kong authorities deny. They also go on to say that he is in solitary confinement for over 23 hours a day, and the Lai family are calling for his release. They're saying, specifically his son Sebastian has said that every time his father shows up in court, he is noticeably more frail and has lost a lot of weight.
Camille Nedelec in Hong Kong there, thank you. A reminder of our top stories. Hugs and handshakes between Starmer and Zelenskyy as the UK show their support for Ukraine ahead of Friday's summit between Trump and Putin. Over 100 organizations accuse Israel of weaponizing aid into Gaza as Hamas continues talks in Cairo. And facing a $1 billion lawsuit, First Lady Melania Trump considers suing Hunter Biden after he makes claims about her connection to Jeffrey Epstein. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. The Rail Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson will be coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.